get a handle on the hundreds of trashed RVs that are just showing up on city streets, many with homeless people living inside.
City leaders say the problem is actually an epidemic.
There's a hidden crisis sweeping across America, and most people don't even see it coming. Layoffs are rising, rents are out of control, and more families every week are being pushed out of traditional housing and into RVs, parking lots, and roadside encampments. Experts say this could double, even triple, within just a few years. The RV homeless wave is here, and we're only seeing the beginning. The most dangerous force pushing Americans into RVs isn't wanderlust, it's layoffs. For decades, job losses came in predictable cycles, but between 2024 and 2026, the pattern has changed. Layoff trackers estimate anywhere from 700,000 to over 1.8 million job losses across this 2-year span. And many analysts say we're still early in the downturn. When a household loses its primary income, the trajectory is predictable. Rent becomes unaffordable within 60 to 120 days. Roughly 40% of Americans already live paycheck to paycheck, and one missed paycheck can trigger eviction filings or vehicle repossession. With average national rent at $2,050 to $2,400, unemployment checks typically ranging from $300 to $500 per week, depending on the state, don't come close to covering housing, food, gas, utilities, insurance, or debt. So families downsize by necessity, not choice. An RV becomes the last stop between shelter and sleeping on the sidewalk. And once in that RV, getting back out is extremely difficult because job competition spikes, credit scores tank fast, and landlords often require 3 times monthly rent income to qualify. Losing a job used to be a setback. Now it's the beginning of a housing collapse. If layoffs deepen the way economists predict, the number of people pushed into RVs and cars as primary shelter could double or triple within a few years. Layoffs push people into crisis, but the bigger trap is that housing costs and wages no longer live in the same universe. In the 1980s and 1990s, housing typically consumed around 20 to 25% of take-home pay. Today, for millions of Americans, that number has jumped to 40 to 60%. And for minimum wage workers, it is mathematically impossible. The national median rent crossed $2,000 in 2023 and has stayed stubbornly high, with some metro areas still rising despite cooling markets. Meanwhile, wage growth has slowed sharply. Adjusted for inflation, the average worker earns only about 1 to 3% more than they did 20 years ago, meaning real earning power is nearly flat. At the same time, groceries are up over 25% since 2020. Electricity costs have risen 12 to 20% higher, and car insurance premiums have jumped 30 to 40% in some states. Add student loans resuming, medical debt collections, and record credit card balances topping $1.1 trillion, and many households have no margin left. The result is that Americans don't need a dramatic event to tip into homelessness. They only need a rent increase, a medical emergency, or a car repair. RVs, used vans, and even broken-down trailers become fallback housing because they require no background check and no income verification. The cost of living crisis is turning people with full-time jobs into nomads against their will, and the trend accelerates every quarter that wages fail to catch up. The idea that up to 5 million Americans could end up living in RVs, vans, or cars within the next few years sounds shocking until you track the math. Estimates suggest 1.5 to 2.5 million people already live in vehicles in some form, though most are not counted in formal homelessness data. Growth rates from 2018 to 2024 averaged 15 to 20% per year, with bigger spikes during the pandemic and following major layoff cycles. If even the lowest projections continue at 10% annual growth, the population doubles within 7 years. But if layoffs deepen, the curve steepens dramatically. Consider that roughly 4 to 5 million eviction filings occur annually, and eviction records make renters virtually unrentable in many markets. Add millions of homeowners underwater on mortgages with rising insurance and property taxes, and another wave could join them. Then layer in long-term trends like boomers aging into fixed incomes, retirees priced out of parks, and gig workers unable to qualify for traditional leases. Combined demographic, economic, and housing forces point toward a scenario where vehicle residence becomes not a fringe lifestyle, but a major housing class. RV manufacturers also report record numbers of older, cheaper used rigs circulating in the market, a sign that distressed households are liquidating homes and downsizing. If layoffs hit the 15 to 20 million job loss range some analysts warn about, the 5 million projection is not just possible. It may be conservative. Most Americans still imagine RV homelessness as something affecting single adults or retirees, but the fastest growing group entering vehicle living is families with children. School districts across the country now report increasing numbers of students listing cars, campgrounds, or no fixed address as their residence. Some California districts saw a 60% increase in vehicle-based student registrations over 5 years. In states like Arizona, Florida, and Washington, teachers confirm students are completing homework using parking lot Wi-Fi, library bathrooms, and fast food dining rooms. The typical family story follows a pattern. A major rent increase, job loss, or eviction pushes them into temporary motel rooms. But with motels averaging $90 to $120 per night, which equals $2,700 to $3,600 a month, families run out of money faster than ever. A used RV between $3,000 and $10,000, even non-running, becomes the only affordable shelter that keeps everyone together. But the reality is brutal. Families trade bedrooms for bunks, running water for jugs, private bathrooms for rest stops, and stability for constant uncertainty. Rising numbers of children living in vehicles mean long-term consequences, including disrupted school attendance, no quiet study space, lack of refrigeration for food, and limited access to health care. Children now represent one of the fastest growing segments of America's hidden homeless population. Proof that the economic crisis isn't targeting just the poor, but middle-class parents who used to live comfortably. A historic shift is underway. America's vehicle homeless population is no longer made up mostly of the chronically poor. A growing share are first-timers, people who once owned homes, held stable jobs, or maintained middle-class lifestyles. These are teachers, nurses, military veterans, construction workers, and truck drivers who never imagined living in an RV. Surveys by outreach groups show that 40 to 55% of newly displaced people say this is their first experience with homelessness. What makes 2025 to 2026 unique is the speed of financial collapse. A family with $1,200 in savings, close to the national median, can be wiped out by one missed paycheck, an unexpected repair bill, or a medical emergency. Housing instability doesn't unfold over years. It hits in weeks. Losing a rental means deposits, first and last month's rent, and income verification they no longer meet. So families buy the cheapest used camper they can find, or move into a vehicle they already own. These new vehicle residents enter with no knowledge of winterizing, solar power, waste disposal, or campground rules. Many burn through fuel or generator money in days. And unlike traditional homelessness, vehicle dwellers carry car payments, insurance, and maintenance costs, which means one breakdown can push them further into crisis. The rise of the first-time RV homeless isn't just a housing failure. It's the erosion of an entire economic tier that once represented the backbone of America. There's a brutal irony at the heart of RV homelessness. It has never been cheaper to buy a used RV and never more expensive to keep one running. Since 2022, the used RV market has fallen 30 to 50%, with many older models selling for $3,000 to $8,000, or sometimes practically abandoned for free on Facebook Marketplace. Why? Because millions of Americans who bought RVs during the pandemic boom are dumping them due to rising campground costs, insurance hikes, and mechanical failures they can't afford to fix. But once a family moves into an RV, the costs add up fast. A single major repair like a roof leak, transmission failure, fridge compressor, or axle repair can cost $2,000 to $8,000, sometimes more than the value of the rig itself. Tires alone are $200 to $400 each, and motorhome tires often dry rot long before they wear out. RV systems also require specialized service, which has exploded in price as technicians chase demand, charging $150 to $200 per hour in many states. Worse, RV parts are now backlogged months in some areas due to supply shortages and factory bankruptcies. Emergency repairs force many to abandon rigs entirely, swelling street parking and tow-away numbers. Families stay stuck because selling is pointless. They owe repair debt on something worth scrap value. RV living is marketed as cheap freedom, But for those living in distress, it rapidly becomes a financial trap that makes escape almost impossible, especially when every breakdown risks turning shelter into a stranded vehicle. Across the country, living in a vehicle is crossing the line from survival strategy to potential criminal act. In the past 5 years, over 90 U.S. cities have passed ordinances restricting overnight vehicle parking, and more than 35 states now allow local governments to tow occupied RVs under nuisance or safety hazard rules. Cities like Los Angeles, Seattle, Phoenix, and San Francisco now enforce no overnight parking bans in entire zip codes, especially near schools, parks, and residential neighborhoods. Fines range from $50 to over $500, and unpaid tickets can trigger registration holds, impound orders, or loss of the vehicle. The enforcement tools keep expanding with tow-away zones covering downtown districts, 72-hour parking limits enforced by plate scanners, vehicle residency bans that apply citywide, and hazmat classification if sewage leaks or trash accumulates. Once a vehicle is towed, the owner often has 72 hours to reclaim it, with fees commonly exceeding $800 to $2,500. Most can't pay, meaning cities effectively confiscate a person's home. Advocates warn vehicle homelessness is being treated as a law enforcement issue rather than a housing crisis. As policies tighten, families must constantly relocate, rotating from industrial parks to Walmart lots, rest stops, and remote streets to avoid fines. Criminalization doesn't reduce homelessness. It disperses and hides it, trapping vehicle dwellers in a revolving cycle of tickets, towing, and debt that keeps them from climbing back into permanent housing. RV parks were never designed to house America's economic refugees, yet thousands are now doing exactly that. The industry once operated on seasonal tourism, but in 2025 to 2026, campgrounds report record numbers of full-time residents seeking long-term stays. Many campgrounds that used to welcome month-to-month tenants have now imposed 2-week or 30-day stay limits to stop permanent settlements from forming. Rates are rising fast. What cost $450 to $600 per month in 2018 can now exceed $900 to $1,400, especially in high-demand states like Texas, Arizona, Florida, California, and Nevada. Even discount networks like Thousand Trails and KOA are struggling with capacity. Some parks maintain waiting lists hundreds of people long. The shift is driven by numbers. Tourism surged post-pandemic, full-time RV users expanded dramatically, and layoffs created new long-term residents. With more demand than supply, campgrounds are forced to choose between vacationers who spend more per night and economic refugees who need long stays. Corporate-owned parks have largely chosen tourists. Families pushed out of campgrounds often have nowhere else legal to go. Walmart and Cracker Barrel parking lots increasingly post no overnight parking signs to avoid becoming informal migrant camps. The result is a pressure wave. As RV parks tighten policies, thousands move into city streets, forest pullouts, rural properties, and industrial parking zones. Campgrounds, once a temporary solution, are now cracking under the load, accelerating the spread of vehicle homelessness into every corner of America. What was once limited to California and Washington is now spreading across the country with aggressive RV tow-away operations targeting vehicle dwellers. Los Angeles alone has removed over 1,500 inhabited RVs from city streets in the last 2 years. Seattle cleared more than 3,000 vehicles, and Portland recorded tows every 3 hours during peak sweeps. Denver, San Diego, Phoenix, Austin, and even smaller cities like Eugene, Boise, and Spokane have followed with similar actions. Officials argue public safety, sanitation, and crime concerns, especially after large encampments near hospitals, schools, and business districts, but the reality is harsher. Towing removes shelter without providing alternatives. In many cities, police coordinate with sanitation departments to destroy confiscated RVs, not store them, meaning families lose everything in minutes, including clothing, medicine, tools, birth certificates, IDs, immigration papers, and pets in some tragic cases. Once towed, reclaim fees from impound lots typically range $1,100 to $3,200 plus daily storage charges. Most people living in RVs can't pay a tenth of that. The legal justification keeps expanding with abandoned vehicle classifications, environmental violations, insurance requirement enforcement, and derelict structure codes. Even states like Florida and Texas, long considered RV-friendly, are stepping up enforcement near beaches, state parks, and coastal cities. Tow-away sweeps are a breaking point. When your shelter has wheels, losing it means dropping instantly from vehicle-based homelessness into rough sleeping survival tents or shelters already at 90 to 95% capacity. The public rarely sees this, but tow-away programs are quietly erasing entire communities. One of the strangest twists of this crisis is that the numbers are much worse than most Americans realize because vehicle dwellers are rarely counted as homeless. SHUD, the federal agency that tracks homelessness, defines homelessness mainly as people in shelters or outdoors, not those sleeping in RVs, vans, cars, or motels. As a result, the official homeless population appears to be around 660,000, but academic studies suggest the true number could be 2 million to 3.5 million, with over half living in vehicles. The annual point-in-time count, the benchmark figure used in news headlines, depends on volunteers going out one night a year trying to visually identify unsheltered people. RV dwellers are spread across multiple counties, parked in obscure industrial zones, hiding to avoid tickets and tows, and constantly moving. Parents don't report students as homeless because they fear losing custody. Vehicle residents avoid outreach teams to avoid being displaced or fined. Even school districts, which often know more than HUD, only count students, not entire families. This invisibility protects people from enforcement but kills them statistically. Funding for shelters, food banks, and rental assistance is based on federal numbers, meaning resources are calibrated for a homeless population less than half the real size. America cannot solve what it refuses to acknowledge. The RV homeless crisis is booming beneath the surface, cordoned off by definitions, bureaucracy, and political optics, and by the time the numbers catch up, millions more will already be living on wheels. A growing trend in America's housing collapse is the rise of hybrid encampments, where RVs, vans, tents, and cars gather together in loosely organized communities. These zones form for one simple reason: survival strength in numbers. Parking lots near Walmart, Cracker Barrel, Planet Fitness, and Home Depot have become major hubs, not because they're glamorous, but because they offer 24-hour bathrooms, Wi-Fi, and security lighting. Some stores estimate 20 to 50 vehicles per night, even after posting no overnight parking signs. Highway interchanges, frontage roads, abandoned shopping centers, and empty industrial strips now host clusters of 20 to 200 vehicles, with tents filling the gaps when rigs run out of fuel or break down. Studies show these encampments are growing fastest in California, Washington, Oregon, Nevada, Arizona, Texas, Colorado, and Florida. Local residents often demand removal, but cities are running out of places to send people. Shelters are 90 to 100% full in more than a dozen major metro areas. Unlike traditional homeless camps, these communities often include full-time workers commuting to jobs, families dropping kids at school each morning, and retirees living off shrinking social security checks. Hybrid camps demonstrate a crucial truth. Vehicle homelessness isn't fringe or temporary. It is now forming semi-stable community structures, showing just how many Americans have fallen outside the traditional housing system and how widespread the crisis is becoming. These encampments represent a new tier of American housing, one that exists in parking lots and highway margins rather than neighborhoods. Vehicle living wears down the body and mind far faster than traditional homelessness, and the numbers prove it. Health clinics report soaring increases in respiratory infections, skin diseases, untreated dental problems, and PTSD-like stress indicators among RV and vehicle dwellers. Without refrigeration, diets shift heavily to shelf-stable processed foods, increasing risks of diabetes, hypertension, and malnutrition, especially in children. Mental health damage is staggering. Anxiety and depression rates are estimated at 60 to 80%, chronic sleep disruption is nearly universal, and elevated suicide risk rivals that of long-term homelessness. The constant uncertainty about where to park, whether police will knock, and whether the RV will break down triggers prolonged fight or flight response, increasing cortisol levels and eroding immunity. Access to healthcare is nearly non-existent. Homeless vehicle residents often avoid emergency room visits due to fear of bills, have no insurance after losing jobs, and postpone care until conditions become emergencies. For parents, the pressure is doubled. Many live with the fear that seeking medical help may draw attention to unstable housing and risk CPS involvement. Extreme heat and cold add lethal risk. When temperatures hit 90 to 110 degrees Fahrenheit, RV interiors can spike 20 to 30 degrees higher, and many rigs lack functioning air conditioning. In winter storms, heaters often fail due to fuel or battery shortages. Every night spent in a vehicle isn't just uncomfortable, it shortens lives. The health burden is one of the least visible but most devastating consequences of America's housing crisis. The hidden face of RV homelessness is children, and the long-term cost could reshape America's future. Public schools are reporting rapidly rising numbers of students classified as living in doubling up, motels, campgrounds, or vehicles. The Department of Education recorded over 1.2 million homeless students in a recent year, and experts believe the real number could be closer to 2 million because families rarely self-report vehicle housing. Children living in RVs encounter challenges others never see. They have no stable internet for homework, face constant school changes as parents move to avoid tickets or towing, lack sleep due to cramped sleeping spaces, and have limited access to showers or laundry. Teachers say these students often show signs of extreme exhaustion, behavioral issues linked to stress, hunger during class, and falling academic performance. School transitions are especially damaging. Studies show that changing schools more than 3 times can cut reading scores by half a year and math scores by a full year. Sports, clubs, and tutoring, the activities that build opportunity, are almost impossible for nomadic families to maintain. Older students often skip school entirely to help parents work odd jobs or care for siblings while adults seek employment. Without intervention, an entire generation could grow up with chronic instability as a starting point, creating ripple effects in college attendance, job readiness, and social mobility for decades to come. The educational damage being inflicted on children living in vehicles represents a crisis within the crisis, one that will echo through American society for generations. RV living used to be viewed as a cost-saving alternative to rent, but inflation has completely flipped the equation. Fuel is the biggest hit. Gasoline prices have fluctuated wildly, but remain 40 to 70% higher than pre-pandemic levels in many regions. For families who need to drive daily to avoid tickets or tow-away zones, fuel can consume $80 to $150 a week, or over $5,000 a year, far more than basic utilities in a small apartment. Propane, once cheap, has risen 20 to 35% in most states, especially during winter cold snaps. A family heating and cooking off-grid may burn 20 to 40 pounds per week, costing $60 to $120, and more if temperatures plunge or multiple people need hot water. Generators, often used to run heaters or microwaves, consume $25 to $40 per day in gasoline, turning emergency power into a crippling expense. Solar panels are helpful, but require upfront investment many cannot afford. Even maintenance items once taken for granted like oil, filters, tires, hoses, and batteries have soared 25 to 50% due to supply chain issues. Meanwhile, utility fees at many campgrounds now add extra charges for electricity usage during peak seasons. Instead of saving money, vehicle dwellers are often trapped spending more than they did on rent while living with fewer comforts, less safety, and more instability. Inflation is punishing those already at the bottom, turning RVs from a lifeboat into another financial burden, sinking families deeper into emergency survival mode. The support systems meant to catch people in crisis are buckling under demand. Food banks nationwide report 25 to 60% increases in families seeking help since 2022. Many now ration food, switch to distributions twice a month, or rely on emergency federal supply drops. Shelters, which have limited RV-capable parking, routinely operate at 90 to 100% occupancy during peak seasons. In states like Oregon, California, and Washington, wait lists for beds stretch weeks or months. Churches and volunteer networks, long the backbone of homelessness support, say the majority of new requests come from working families, retirees, and parents in vehicles, not long-term street homeless populations. Aid workers describe a pattern. People show up with children still in school clothes. They ask for gas, not blankets. And they request pet food, insulin refrigerators, and heaters. A number of cities are now turning away applicants entirely, not because of eligibility, but because they have no remaining resources. Meanwhile, donations are dropping. Inflation squeezes everyone, and fewer households have money left to give. Federal programs like SNAP, commonly known as food stamps, are seeing surging applications but shrinking purchasing power. And emergency pandemic relief funds expired years ago. Nonprofits warn they are facing the largest demand surge in modern history without the funding to scale up. As more Americans fall into vehicle living, support networks designed as lifelines are themselves drowning, leaving millions one crisis away from hunger, illness, or worse. The safety net is tearing. If layoffs continue or accelerate, and with major economists predicting more job cuts into 2026, the RV homeless population could explode beyond anything the US has seen. Consider the math. If even 10% of the 15 to 20 million projected layoffs translate into displacement, 1.5 to 2 million more people could lose stable housing. Combine that with the existing vehicle-housed population, estimated at 1.5 to 3 million, and the 5 million mark becomes not a hypothesis, but a baseline. Cities could see mass migration as families move from expensive coasts into cheaper interior states like Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, and Tennessee, overwhelming those regions next. Towing programs may become even more aggressive as local officials face pressure from residents and businesses. States could begin passing statewide bans, not just citywide, turning vehicle residency from a patchwork problem into a national showdown. Schools, food banks, hospitals, and law enforcement will increasingly face the overflow from collapsing housing stability. At some point, the federal government will be forced to acknowledge vehicle homelessness as a separate category of housing, possibly triggering subsidized RV parks, emergency relocation zones, housing voucher reform, and FEMA-style intervention. In the end, if layoffs keep rising and housing costs keep outpacing wages, vehicle living won't be an alternative lifestyle. It will be a new default housing class, reshaping America's cities, schools, labor market, and public systems for a generation. The question is not whether this crisis will grow, but how fast. America is not prepared for what's coming next. If we don't talk about this crisis, it will swallow entire communities before anyone notices. Do you think the RV homeless population will hit 5 million? Or are we already there? Tell me in the comments. And don't miss our next video, where we break down the 15 states cracking down hardest on RV living and why people are fleeing across borders to survive.